How to become emotionally unshakable. 11 Stoic habits. Stoic mindset. The most dangerous moment in a man's life is not a heart attack. It's not losing your job. It's not even a divorce. It's the Tuesday morning when you're sitting completely alone in a quiet room, and you realize that you've spent the last 10 years reacting to everything and deliberately choosing nothing. You got up every single day. You showed up. You provided. You held it together when no one else could. But if you're honest with yourself right now, completely honest, you know that somewhere along the way, you stopped driving your own life and became a passenger in it. Studies on men between 40 and 60 consistently show one pattern without exception. The higher the external pressure, career, family, finances, the more completely a man surrenders his internal world. He stops thinking, he starts surviving. And the tragedy is that nobody around him even notices, because from the outside, he still looks like the man in control. Marcus Aurelius understood this better than anyone alive in his century. He was a Roman emperor commanding armies, managing an empire under constant threat of collapse, surrounded by betrayal and war, and he was quietly falling apart on the inside. So he did something almost no powerful man has ever done. He wrote it all down. Not for history, not for an audience, just for himself. 11 private habits he used every single day to stop the world from breaking him. Those 11 habits are what this video is about. But here's what's different from everything else you've seen on Stoicism. We are not going to talk about philosophy. We are not going to quote ancient texts and leave you inspired for 20 minutes before you forget everything. We are going to build a precise operating system, 11 specific protocols, that rewires how you respond to pressure, conflict, and loss before your next difficult conversation even happens. By the end of this video, you will know exactly why you lose emotional control in the moments that matter most, and you will have the specific mechanism to stop it. Not someday, not after years of practice, but starting with your very next reaction. This is not motivation. Motivation fades by Thursday. This is architecture, and we are building it right now, layer by layer. Beginning with the single habit that changes everything, the one Marcus Aurelius listed first in his private journal, and the one that most men over 40 have never been taught: the stripping of representation. The first step toward becoming unshakable is one of the most uncomfortable things a man can do: learning to see the world exactly as it is, stripped of every story your ego has built around it. Here's the problem: your brain doesn't experience reality. It experiences your interpretation of reality. And for most men, that interpretation is built on layers of emotional labeling that turn small events into enormous threats. A traffic jam becomes personal punishment from the universe. A critical comment from a colleague becomes a full assault on your identity. A missed promotion becomes proof that you're falling behind, that the younger guys are winning and you're running out of time. Marcus Aurelius had a specific remedy for this. He called it stripping the representation. He wrote, "Look at fine wine and see only fermented grape juice. Look at a purple robe and see only sheep hair dyed with shellfish blood. Remove the legend from the object, and the object loses its power over you." Now apply that to your actual life. When a crisis hits at work and your chest tightens, stop calling it a crisis. Call it what it actually is: a set of new variables that require a logical sequence of decisions. When someone disrespects you in a meeting, strip it down. What actually happened? A person expressed their own insecurity through the vibration of their vocal cords. That's it. Nothing more. When you remove the emotional adjectives from your internal vocabulary, you starve your anxiety of its primary fuel. You are not ignoring what happened. You are not suppressing your feelings. You are seeing reality more clearly than anyone else in the room, and that clarity is where your power lives. Think about the energy you waste every day, decorating your problems with layers of personal misery. What would happen if you redirected that energy into solving them? Men who master this habit move through obstacles that paralyze everyone around them, not because they feel less, but because they see more clearly. When you see an expensive car, don't see success. See metal, rubber, and a loan payment. When you see a looming deadline, don't see a threat to your career. See a sequence of hours and tasks. When you see your reflection in a difficult moment, don't see a man who is failing. See a man who is being forged. This is the foundation. Once you strip the world of its false weight, you realize you are still standing. And that realization is the beginning of something most men never find: the freedom to choose your response. The doctrine of strategic ignorance. You are being poisoned by information you don't need, and it is costing you far more than you realize. Right now, there are algorithms designed by the most sophisticated engineers in the world, working 24 hours a day with one single goal: to keep your nervous system in a state of low-grade emergency. Every notification, every headline, every outrage cycle is engineered to trigger the threat detection systems in your brain, the same systems your ancestors used to survive predators. You are running prehistoric fear software in a world that profits from your panic. And every morning when you reach for your phone before you've even had coffee, you are handing over the keys to your mental sovereignty to people who don't know your name. Epictetus, a man who was born a slave and became one of the greatest minds in history, had a phrase for this: concern yourself only with what is within your control. Everything else is noise. Most of what you consume online is not within your control. It doesn't change how you act in the next hour. It doesn't improve your ability to be a better father, a sharper leader, or a more resilient man. It just makes you feel busy while your actual character starves for attention. This is what we call the doctrine of strategic ignorance. And it is not ignorance in the traditional sense. It is precision. It is the ruthless architecture of your own attention. Ask yourself this question every single time you are about to consume a piece of information. Does this change what I do in the next hour? Does this make me a better version of myself? If the answer is no, that information is an uninvited guest feeding on your life force. Close the door. Your attention is the most valuable asset you own. Every minute it's captured by something trivial is a minute it's stolen from something profound. Your health, your relationships, your actual work. The men who operate at the highest level in their 40s and 50s are not the most informed men in the room. They are the most focused. This week, conduct one experiment. For 3 days, consume no news before noon. No social media before your most important task is done. No political debates. No outrage loops. Watch what happens to your clarity. Watch what happens to your energy. Watch who you start to become when you stop feeding the noise machine and start feeding your own mind. The algorithms will survive without your attention. The question is whether you can survive as the man you actually want to be if you keep giving it to them. The sacredness of the immediate role. Stop for a second and pay attention to where your mind actually is right now. If you're like most men between 35 and 60, it's not here. It's somewhere in the future, trying to solve a problem that hasn't happened yet. Or it's somewhere in the past, rehearsing a decision you can't change. Your body is present. Your mind is a fugitive. This mental fragmentation is the engine of modern anxiety. You are not exhausted from the work you're doing. You are exhausted from the weight of the work you're not doing, the conversations you're dreading, the deadlines that haven't arrived, the versions of the future you're trying to prevent. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Perform every task as if it were your last, free from every distraction and every departure from reason." He wasn't being dramatic. He was describing a precise psychological technique that the most effective men in history have used to reclaim their focus under maximum pressure. The practice is this: wherever you are, be entirely there. Not 80%, not 90%, 100%. When you are with your kids, you are a father, and that role is your entire universe for that moment. No spreadsheets, no strategy sessions in your head. When you are in a critical meeting, you are a leader, fully present to every word being spoken. When you are alone, working, you are a craftsman, and your work deserves your complete attention. The anxiety of your life is born in the gap between what you are doing and what you think you should be doing. Every time your mind wanders to that gap, it generates stress hormones, drains your working memory, and pulls you away from the only place where anything actually gets done. Right here, right now. Excellence in this moment is the only property you truly own. The future will take care of itself if you take care of this inch of ground you're standing on. Men who master this habit don't just become calmer, they become exponentially more effective because they're finally working at full capacity instead of running a mental background program of fear and distraction. The next time you're with someone who matters to you and your phone buzzes, don't look at it, not because the phone doesn't matter, but because the person in front of you does. That single act, repeated enough times, will change the quality of every relationship you have. Your presence is the most powerful gift you can give, and it is the one thing that cannot be faked. The architecture of voluntary discomfort. There is a quiet crisis happening to men in their 40s and 50s that no one is talking about, and it has nothing to do with finances or health or relationships. It is the crisis of invisible fragility, the slow, invisible atrophying of your ability to tolerate discomfort, delay, inconvenience, and physical hardship. Every app on your phone is designed to eliminate friction. Every service in your city is optimized for your convenience. Every piece of modern technology is engineered to make your life easier, and in doing so, it is gradually making you softer in ways you cannot see. Here is the brutal truth. The unshakable mind is never built in comfort. It is forged in deliberate resistance. Seneca wrote, "Set aside a certain number of days each month to practice poverty. Eat the plainest food, wear your roughest clothing, and ask yourself, is this really the condition I was so afraid of?" That practice, which Seneca called voluntary discomfort, was not about punishment. It was about proof to your own nervous system that you are capable of surviving and operating in conditions that your current lifestyle makes you fear. Here's what most men in their 40s are afraid of, but won't say out loud. They are afraid that if they lost their income, their comfort, their status, they would fall apart. They don't know if they could handle it. And that uncertainty is a subtle, constant source of anxiety that eats at their confidence every single day. Voluntary discomfort eliminates that fear, not by eliminating the possibility of loss, but by proving, repeatedly, that you can function without the things you depend on. When you take a cold shower deliberately, when you skip a meal, when you sleep without the air conditioning on a summer night, you are sending a signal to your subconscious. I am the master of my body. I do not need comfort to operate. This is not about being a martyr. It is about strategic hardening. When you are comfortable being uncomfortable, you free yourself from the single most exhausting activity in a man's life, the constant defensive management of a fragile lifestyle. Men who practice this habit don't just become more resilient, they become more free, because their peace is no longer held hostage by the temperature of the room, the quality of the food, or the smoothness of the commute. They can function anywhere, in any conditions, and that freedom is worth far more than any comfort money can buy. Start small. Tomorrow morning, make the shower cold for the last 2 minutes. Don't negotiate with yourself. Just do it. Notice what happens in your mind when you want to quit and don't. That moment, that tiny act of self-command, is where your new architecture begins. The Stoic detachment from external validation. Here's a question most men will never ask themselves directly. How many of your daily decisions are actually yours? How many of the things you do, the clothes you wear, the car you drive, the opinions you express in public, how many of those are genuinely what you think and want, versus what you believe will earn the approval of people whose respect you need? You are currently living in a prison with invisible walls, and you may have handed the keys to a complete stranger years ago. Every time you wait for your boss to acknowledge your work before you feel confident, every time you post something and wait for the response before deciding how you feel about it, every time you make a career decision based on what other people will think, you are making your internal peace a hostage of someone else's shifting opinion. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Everything which is in any way beautiful has its beauty within itself and is self-sufficient. Praise adds nothing to it." A diamond does not become more valuable because someone notices it, and it doesn't become less valuable because it's buried where no one can see it. Its worth is in its internal structure. Your character is exactly the same. Your integrity, your discipline, your quality of work. None of those become more real when someone applauds them, and none of them disappear when someone criticizes them. But here is what seeking validation actually does to you. It puts your emotional state on a permanent roller coaster that someone else is operating. When the compliment comes, you feel a surge, followed immediately by the anxiety of keeping it. When the criticism comes, you collapse as if your worth has been erased. You become a puppet, and the world pulls your strings at will. The path out is not to stop caring about other people's perspectives entirely. It is to build an internal compass so precise and so well maintained that external opinions become useful data rather than emotional verdicts. If you know, truly know, that you acted with integrity, the silence of 1,000 people cannot diminish that reality. If you know you failed your own standards, the applause of 1,000 people cannot save you from it. Your only job is to maintain the quality of your own standard. That is the only court that matters. This detachment is not coldness. It is the ultimate competitive advantage. Men who have broken free from the need for approval make better decisions, take smarter risks, and build things that last, because they're building for the right reasons, not performing for an audience. The freedom is available to you, but you have to be willing to stop letting other people write the verdict on your life. The radical rejection of the victim narrative. There is a pattern that destroys more men in their 40s than anything else, more than bad luck, more than difficult circumstances, more than the actual obstacles they face. And it is this: the addiction to the story that explains why things aren't their fault. The victim narrative is seductive because it is almost always partially true. The economy did make things harder. The company was unfair. The people around you did make mistakes that cost you. That is real. And acknowledging it is not weakness, it is honesty. But there is a precise moment where honest acknowledgement becomes a cage. It is the moment when you stop using the injustice as information and start using it as an excuse to stay small. It is the moment when you decide, consciously or not, that you are waiting for the universe, or the person who wronged you, or the system, to apologize before you decide to move forward. Epictetus, a man who was literally owned by another human being, who had no political freedom, no financial resources, no social standing, wrote, "It is not things that disturb us, but our judgments about things." A man who was a slave understood something that free men with every advantage often refuse to accept. Your interpretation of what happened to you is the only thing that determines what happens next. The apology you're waiting for is not coming, and even if it came, it would not give you back what you lost. Only you can do that, and you do it, not by pretending the injustice didn't happen, but by refusing to let it determine what you do next. Here is the shift that changes everything. Stop asking, why is this happening to me? That question makes you a spectator. Start asking, what does this situation demand from me right now? That question makes you an architect. Does this moment require more patience? More courage? A completely different strategy. A willingness to let go of what you thought your life was supposed to look like in order to build what it actually can be. Every hardship you face is raw material. It is not proof of your failure. It is the training ground for the version of you that the next chapter of your life requires. Men who understand this don't just survive their setbacks. They use them. They come out the other side harder, sharper, and more dangerous to their own limitations than they were before. You cannot control the cards you were dealt. You are the absolute master of how you play the hand. Claim that mastery, not someday, not when conditions improve, right now. The emotional audit of peak success. Most men are prepared, at least in theory, to handle failure. What almost no man is prepared for is the psychological danger of success. When things go well, when the promotion comes, when the business grows, when the recognition arrives, there is a chemical shift in the brain that is almost indistinguishable from the early stages of addiction. The dopamine floods in, the confidence swells. And in that state, something subtle and lethal begins to happen. You start to believe that the rules that apply to everyone else don't apply to you anymore. You stop practicing the habits that built the success. You relax the discipline. You begin to confuse your current results with permanent proof of your superiority. And the higher you climb, the further the fall. Not because the market or the world becomes more hostile, but because you became softer at exactly the moment you needed to become more vigilant. Marcus Aurelius, at the height of his power as Emperor of Rome, wrote private notes to himself reminding him that everything raised to a height is destined to fall. He was not being pessimistic. He was performing what we call the emotional audit of peak success, the deliberate act of checking your own ego at the door of your greatest moments. The habit is this: when you win, acknowledge it quietly, not with suppression. Celebration is human and healthy, but with proportion. A quiet nod, rather than an extended performance. A moment of gratitude followed immediately by the same question you ask when you're losing. What is demanded of me right now? Because the answer is always the same. What is demanded is the continuation of the discipline that created the result. The cold showers, the focused work, the honest internal inventory, the refusal to let your bank account or your title tell you that you've arrived somewhere permanent. True power is remaining the same man in terms of discipline, humility, and self-awareness. Whether the world is cheering for you or silent, men who master this habit build things that last, because they never mistake a season for a permanent state. The market will shift. The recognition will fluctuate. The people who celebrate you today will move on to the next story. Your only protection against those cycles is an internal standard that doesn't rise and fall with external results. Build that standard now while you're winning, because it is infinitely harder to build it after the fall. The perspective of the eternal now. Most of the things keeping you awake at 3 a.m. will be completely invisible in 10 years. That is not speculation. That is the consistent verdict of every man who has lived long enough to look back on the crises of his 40s with the eyes of his 60s. The argument that felt like a verdict. The deadline that felt like a matter of survival. The professional humiliation that made your skin crawl for months. Gone. Dissolved. Indistinguishable from the silence of time. The Stoics practiced a specific mental technique for this. The view from above. You zoom out in your imagination until your house becomes a dot, your city becomes a blur, your country becomes a shape, your entire life becomes a brief flash in the history of a species that has been walking this earth for 200,000 years. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Time is a river of vanishing moments. The past is gone, the future hasn't arrived, and this present moment, with all its urgency, all its pressure, all its sense of absolute consequence, is itself already becoming the past." This is not nihilism, it is proportion. It is the ability to sort, with clarity and speed, what actually deserves your full attention and what is a molehill you have been treating like a mountain. Think about the billions of men who have stood exactly where you are standing right now. They had their own impossible deadlines, their own unfixable relationships, their own careers that felt like they were falling apart, their own fears that kept them awake in the dark. Where are those problems now? They vanished into the silence that swallows everything. When you absorb this perspective, not as a concept, but as something you feel in your body, you gain a psychological advantage that is almost impossible to take away. You become the calmest man in the room, not because you don't feel the pressure, but because you can see clearly that most of what everyone else is panicking about is, in the long arc of a human life, simply noise. This doesn't mean nothing matters. It means you can finally see what actually matters. Your integrity, your relationships, the quality of your presence, the values you pass on, and stop burning your finite energy on everything that doesn't. Zoom out, not as an escape, as a recalibration, and then come back to the present moment with a clarity that most men will never find. The discipline of the internal dialogue. You spend your entire life locked in a room with one person, and that person is the most important relationship you will ever have. Most men treat that relationship with a level of cruelty they would never tolerate from anyone else. If you spoke to your closest friend the way your internal voice speaks to you after a failure, you would have no friends. The names you call yourself, the verdicts you issue in the dark, the way you replay a mistake until it becomes a permanent definition of who you are. This is not humility. It is self-sabotage, wearing the mask of self-awareness. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "No one can harm you unless you permit it, because the harm that lasts is not what other people do to you. It is what you decide those actions mean about your worth." The most dangerous enemy to your mental sovereignty is not a difficult boss, or a hostile market, or an unfair outcome. It is the unchecked voice inside your own skull that translates every setback into evidence of your fundamental inadequacy. Stoicism is the discipline of this internal voice. It is the refusal to let an impression, a fleeting thought, a feeling, a momentary failure, become a settled conviction without a rigorous trial. Every negative thought is a hostile witness. Demand evidence. Cross-examine it. Ask, is this based on objective fact? Or is this the fear response of a brain that is trying to protect me by making me small? When your mind says you are a failure because of a single mistake, correct the record immediately. You are not a failure. You are a man who made an error in a specific situation under specific conditions. Those are completely different things. One is a moment. The other is an identity. By strictly policing your internal language, you are not suppressing emotions. You are choosing which emotions are built on truth and which are built on catastrophizing. This distinction, practiced daily, in small moments, changes the architecture of your brain over time. Neurons that fire together, wire together. Every time you correct a distorted thought, you are building new pathways toward accurate self-perception. The man who masters his internal dialogue in the quiet hours of the night becomes impossible to rattle in the bright light of day, because nothing the world says to him will be more brutal than what he has already said to himself, and he has learned to answer back with evidence instead of acceptance. Talk to yourself the way you would talk to a son who is struggling but capable, with honesty, with firmness, and without the cruelty that accomplishes nothing except making it harder to get back up. The premeditation of adversity. There is a practice the Stoics called premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of adversity. And it is the one habit that modern self-help culture almost never teaches, because it runs completely against the grain of positive thinking. The practice is exactly what it sounds like. You deliberately imagine, in specific detail, the worst realistic outcomes of the situations you are currently navigating, not to spiral into anxiety, not to manufacture suffering that doesn't exist, but to do the one thing that eliminates the power those outcomes have over your behavior. Face them directly, in advance, while you are calm. Marcus Aurelius did this every morning. Before the day began, he would sit and consider what difficulties he might face: arrogant people, betrayals, ingratitude, unexpected losses, and he would ask himself, how would a virtuous man respond to this? He was not predicting the future. He was stress testing his character before the stress arrived. Here's why this is critical for men between 35 and 60. You are operating in a zone of maximum consequence. The decisions you make in this decade, financial, professional, relational, have the largest impact of any decade in your life. And most men in this zone are operating with an unexamined assumption that the good things they have built will continue. That assumption is not a plan. It is a vulnerability. Men who have never imagined losing their job are the most devastated when it happens, not because the event itself is unsurvivable, but because they meet it completely unprepared. Men who have never imagined the end of a marriage, the failure of a business, the loss of their health, face those events with a combination of shock and shame that makes them nearly impossible to navigate. The premeditation of adversity removes the shock. When you have already sat with the realistic possibility of a loss, when you have asked yourself calmly, could I survive this? What would I do? Who would I still be on the other side? The event, if it comes, does not find you unarmed. This is not pessimism. It is the most practical form of resilience preparation available to you. The firefighter who has run simulations in training is not more afraid of fires. He is less afraid, because he knows he has already practiced surviving them. Tonight, before you sleep, choose one scenario you've been avoiding thinking about: a professional risk, a financial vulnerability, a relationship that is more fragile than you'd like to admit. Sit with it. Breathe. Ask, if this happened, what would I do first? You'll discover two things. First, you can bear the thought of it. Second, you already know more about how to survive it than you realized. That knowledge is your armor, and it is built only by those willing to look the worst case in the face before it arrives. The final sovereignty, your unconquerable citadel. You have traveled through 10 layers of discipline to arrive at a truth that very few men ever dare to fully claim. The world around you is volatile. The market shifts. The people you trust will sometimes fail you. Your own body will eventually need maintenance you cannot negotiate away. All of that is real, and none of it is within your complete control. But there is something in you that is different. Something that no economic cycle, no professional setback, no social verdict, no personal tragedy can enter without your explicit permission. Marcus Aurelius called it the inner citadel, the fortress of the mind, where your reason and your will reside, and where no external force can lay siege unless you lower the drawbridge yourself. He wrote, "The mind, which is free from passions, is a fortress. Man has no stronger retreat, and no place where he can find more permanent refuge than within himself." Here is what that means in your actual life right now. It means that the moment something happens, a loss, a failure, a betrayal, an unexpected crisis, there is a gap, a tiny, crucial gap between the event and your response. That gap is your citadel, and everything you have built through these 11 habits lives in that gap. The stripping of representation gives you the ability to see clearly in that gap rather than react from distorted perception. Strategic ignorance gives you the mental bandwidth to think rather than panic. The sacredness of the immediate role anchors you to the only place where anything useful can actually be done. Voluntary discomfort has already proven to your body that it can handle more than it thinks. Detachment from validation means the crowd's reaction doesn't determine your direction. The rejection of the victim narrative means you are already looking for what this moment demands rather than why it shouldn't be happening. The emotional audit means you are as guarded in victory as you are resilient in defeat. The perspective of the eternal now means you can immediately sort what actually matters from what just feels urgent. The discipline of internal dialogue means your worst enemy has been converted into your most rigorous coach. And the premeditation of adversity means nothing that arrives can fully surprise you. These are not separate habits. They are 11 reinforcing walls of the same fortress. Together, they build a man who cannot be broken. Not because he never feels the impact, but because he has built a center of gravity so deep that no external storm can pull him off his axis. Being emotionally unshakable is not about becoming cold. It is not about the absence of feeling. It is about having a self so well ordered, so deeply rooted in what you actually value, that the noise of the world, all of it, the threats and the flattery and the chaos, simply cannot reach the place where you decide who you are. Carry this fortress with you, into your office, into your home, into the face of your greatest fear. When the world tries to break you, let it find only the quiet, immovable surface of a man who has already decided. You are the architect of this space. You are its guardian. The world is waiting to see what a man who cannot be broken looks like in the flesh. Now go out and be that man.